We'll be working on creating a robot type character over the next few videos. We're going to be using some of the techniques that I've shared with you so far, plus we'll be adding some new things to our repertoire of skills in Illustrator. We're going to start off by making the body. To do this, I'm going to be using my rounded rectangle tool. With the rounded rectangle tool selected, I'll double click on my artboard to open up the rounded rectangle dialog box. This is where I can numerically specify the width and the height, but more importantly, it's where I can specify the corner radius. If we go ahead and click OK, you'll see that we make a rounded rectangle with a corner radius. If we click on this again, we can modify the corner radius. So if I change this to 80, and I click OK, you're going to see that I get more of a pill type shape. You can always modify the corners by grabbing these little circles and dragging them in and out. So if the corners aren't to your specifications, you can simply modify them by grabbing these corners and dragging them. You will see that you have 4 sets of these little circles. This allows you to control certain areas of the corners uniquely. In order to have access to the unique corners, you'll need to isolate the corners, which means that you need to select them so one is hollow. Then you can modify this one corner independently of the other corners. I'll go ahead and I'll select everything on my screen by using Command or Control A and hitting Delete. We're going to go ahead and we're going to double click to open up our rounded rectangle specifications. We'll change the corner radius to 50 and click OK. I'm going to add a tiny bit more rounding by dragging this in till it's roughly about 55 points. Now that I have this in place, I'm going to be using my direct selection tool. The direct selection tool is grouped with the group selection tool, and since I was using that last, it is the active tool. I'll just tear off this panel since these are tools that I'm going to be using frequently within this exercise. With the direct selection tool selected, I'm going to select the upper portion of my rounded rectangle. As you can see, these circles are filled while the other ones are hollow. I'll tap S on my keyboard to activate the scale tool, and now if we click, hold, and drag, we're scaling those particular points. So I'm going to pull out so that the top of my shape is a little bit wider than the bottom. I'll switch back to my direct selection tool, then we'll select the bottom portion of the shape. I'm going to tap S to access scaling, and we're going to simply pull in a little bit. This is making the shape more narrow at the bottom and wider at the top. Now that I have the shape roughly how I want it, I'm going to switch to the Smooth tool. The Smooth tool is bundled underneath the Shaper and Pencil tool. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to smooth out the points a little bit, and I'm only really concerned with getting one side of the shape in the format that I want. So I'm going to use the Smooth tool to kind of reshape this particular drawing so that it is smoother on one end than on the other. You can simply keep swiping with the Smooth tool until you get exactly what you want. That is looking pretty good. Now that I have half of this shape looking the way that I want, instead of symmetrically trying to remake this on the other side, I'll use my Line tool and draw a vertical line. I'm going to go back to my Selection tool and I'll select both elements, and then we're going to align the horizontal centers. At this point, I'm going to go to my Pathfinder, and instead of opening the Pathfinder palette, if we look in the Property pane, you get a little mini Pathfinder. If you click on these 3 dots, it'll open up more options. So I'm going to click Divide. Now we'll go ahead and select the Direct Selection tool and select the right half of the shape. I'm going to hit Delete twice to delete that portion of the shape. With the Group Selection tool selected, I'm going to select the remaining portion of the path. We're going to use our Reflect tool, so that's located underneath your Rotate tool, and we'll grab Reflect or click O. I'm going to hit Return to open up the Reflect dialog box, and we want to reflect vertically by 90 degrees. I'll click Copy to create a copy of this shape. With the Group Selection tool, I'm simply going to select the shape and move it over to the right. We want the two halves of this shape to be touching like they are right now. Now I can select both halves of the shape and use my Unite function to create one unique shape. This is more in line in the exact type of shape that I want it to be for this particular character. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create the eyes. We've created something similar, but this one will look a little bit different. I'm going to use my ellipse tool and I'm going to make a circle. Then I'm going to go ahead and use my scale tool by clicking S. We'll hit return to open up the scale options. I'm going to uniformly scale and we're going to make a copy that is larger. So let's scale this up by 150%. If you click preview, you can get an idea of what the new circle is going to look like. That looks good. I'll click copy. And the new circle is in front of the other circle because they both have fills of white. So I'm going to select both. I'll grab the fill and change it to none. This is the shape I get. And now that I see this, I realize that the inner circle is a little large, so I'm just going to hit scale again and hit return, and we'll scale this down about 70%. I'm not going to create a copy as I just want to make it a little bit smaller. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use our line tool and we're going to draw a vertical line. I'm going to select all three objects and once again we'll align the horizontal centers. Now we'll select the line tool. We're going to tap R to access rotate and hit return or enter to open up the rotate dialog box. I want to rotate by 45 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and click 45 degrees and we'll click copy. This is going to make a copy. I'm going to use Command or Control D to copy this 2 more times. So I get a total of 4 lines. Once again, I'm just going to simply select everything and we'll align both the horizontal and vertical centers. This will ensure that everything is centered right in the middle of the shape. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the divide function. So I select all of the shapes, we'll go to the pathfinder, click the 3 dots and hit divide. As you can see, I get something that looks like this. And let's simply zoom in on this area. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill these shapes, and ultimately I want this inner part to be a filled shape. So we can do that using the Pathfinder, but there is another tool that we can use as well. If we go to the Shape Builder tool, this allows us to select a shape and change the way the shape looks. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to hold down Command or Control to temporarily toggle to my selection tool and select everything. With the Shape Builder tool, I'm just going to drag over the areas that I want to merge together. So in this case, I want to merge these inner parts, and you can see how I've merged those together. You can also use the Shape Builder tool to subtract something, and you would hold down your Alt or Option key, and you can see my arrow has a small minus underneath. And if you tap with the Option or Alt key down, you'll be subtracting from that shape. I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to click Undo. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back to my Group Selection tool. We'll select the inner circle, and we're going to just flip the fill and stroke color so that the inner circle is now going to be black. Now what we'll do is we'll fill the remaining shapes with some colors. I'm going to be using my swatch palette, which is located right here, but I'm going to create some custom colors. So we'll go ahead and we'll tap the folder icon to create a new color group. I'm going to go ahead and call this group Robot. The new color group by default is going to place any selected colors within the color group. So black got placed in there. What I'll do now is I'll simply draw a shape on my artboard just to use as reference, and I'm going to want to change the fill color. We can do this a number of ways. One way to change the fill color is to go to the toolbar, and if we double click on the fill color, it's going to open up our color picker. With the color picker, we can use the spectrum slider to select a new shade. Once we have the new shade selected, we can move the little circle inside to pick the hue of that particular shade. So I'm going to kind of get a dusty blue. I'll click OK, and that looks good. I want to place this inside of my robot folder. So what I'll do is, with this shape selected, I'm going to click on the robot folder icon and we'll hit plus. It's going to go ahead and ask us if we want to name this swatch, and we'll go ahead and we'll change the color mode to RGB. When I first made my document, I neglected to set it up as an RGB document. But ultimately, since I'm going to be working with this project as a screen project, I want to be working in RGB. So we'll change the color mode to RGB, click OK. Now I'm going to go to File, Document Color Mode, and we're going to change this to RGB. As you can see, the color mode has now been changed to RGB. So when we create a new color, it should default to the RGB color mode. I'm going to select a slightly darker color of this blue teal color. Once again, with this selected, I'm going to click my robot folder and we'll click the plus symbol to add this in. At this point, you can see how we're making an RGB color swatch. I'll go ahead and click OK to accept that. I'm going to double click on the color picker, and we're also going to get kind of a orange brown shade. So I'm going to move the spectrum slider down here, and then we'll go ahead and pick up a kind of orangey brown color, and we'll add this in. If you don't select the folder icon when you click plus, it's going to make a new swatch, but it's going to place it in the default swatch category. You can always grab this color and drag it to your color swatch folder, but if you want it to be created within the folder, you'll need to have it selected. I'm going to double click one more time, and we're going to get a slightly more orangey and a little darker shade of this color as well. So I'll click OK, and then with this folder selected, I'm going to hit plus to add this in. I'll click OK, and then finally I'm going to make a couple of shades of gray. So we're going to be using a light gray, a medium gray, and a dark gray. Great. Now I'm going to delete the square. Now that I have the colors in place, I'm going to select the lighter color of teal. We're going to go to our Shape Builder tool, and underneath the Shape Builder there's something called the Live Paint bucket. This is an easy way that you can apply color to any element on your page. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold down our Command or Control key and select this shape. Now with the Live Paint bucket tool, I'm going to fill every other shape with the lighter color. Now we'll switch to the darker color, and we're going to click and fill every other one with the darker color. Now that I see these together, I see that my light color is a little bit too light. So we're going to come over here and we're going to double click on this color. I'm going to adjust the hue of the color in this dialog box. So we're going to add a little bit more teal, we're going to add a little bit more red, and a little bit more blue. This will make the color slightly lighter. I'll click OK, and as you can see, it not only changed the color within my swatch palette, but it also updated the color that's being used outside of the swatch palette. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the stroke. So I'm going to select everything, I'll activate the stroke color and switch this to none. Finally, we're going to make one more circular type of shape using the ellipse tool. I'm going to draw a shape, and we'll change the fill color to white and get rid of our stroke. I'm going to place this shape over the eye. Let's scale this down a little bit, and we'll place this in the upper right hand corner of the pupil. I'm going to select everything that we've drawn so far and group it together. You can group an element by using the keyboard shortcut of Command or Control G or using Object Group. Now we're going to draw a couple more circles. So I'm going to draw a circle that is slightly larger than what we had before. We'll change our fill color to none. just so we can see everything. Then we're going to go ahead and duplicate this circle. So I'm going to hit my scale tool. We'll hit return or enter, and we're going to scale it up by 125% and create a copy. Then I'll select both of these circles. We're going to add a black stroke to them, and then we're going to select everything, and we're going to use our vertical and horizontal align so that everything is going to be aligned. Finally, I'm going to select the outer circle, and now that I see everything together, I realize it's a tad too large. So I'm going to hold down my Option and Shift key so that I can visually scale it down a little bit, like so. Then what we're going to do is we're going to fill the outer circle with a gradient. In order to fill with a gradient, we need to activate our fill color, and then we'll switch to the gradient tool. This will allow the element to be filled with a gradient. As you can see, by default, the gradient palette is going to open, and you can make adjustments to the gradient. If you click on these color stops, you can change the fill color. Now, by default, this is a black and white gradient, so if I wanted to add an actual color, I would need to go to the wing menu and choose RGB or CMYK, but I'm working in RGB, and then I could specify an RGB color. We do, however, want to just use a black to white gradient, so I'll move this back to white. Now we're going to switch to the gradient tool, and once the shape is activated, if you grab the gradient tool, this will allow you to control how the gradient fills the shape. So I can make an adjustment to the colors that are on the gradient. I can control the center point of the gradient, and if you position your mouse to the outer part of the gradient, you can rotate the gradient. So I want the highlight part of my gradient to be in the upper right hand corner. I'm going to swing this around, and then I'll grab the entire gradient bar, and we're going to move it so it spans across the shape like so. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select this shape, and we'll use Object, Arrange, Send to Back. Finally, I'm going to select the second circle, and we'll change the fill color to white, and we'll use Object, Arrange, Send Backward. You can see the keyboard shortcut is Command or Control bracket key. So if you need to do this multiple times, you can hit the keyboard shortcut to get the element in place. Now you can see that I've created an eyeball that has a metal-ish type of outer portion. At this point, I'm going to add a little bit of a roughen texture to the outer portion of this particular shape. So I'm going to select the gradient element, and we're going to be using the brush tool to do this. So I'll grab my brush tool. With the brush tool selected, I need to specify my fill and stroke color. Since this element is currently selected, if I make any of these changes, it will affect the element. So in order to change the brush fill color, I'm going to Command or Control click to deselect. Now I'll get rid of the fill color, and I'm going to change the stroke color to white. Then we're going to go to the brush palette, which is located right here. And if you look in the brush palette, you have a number of brushes that are loaded. In order for me to show you how the brush tool works, let's just temporarily change the brush color to something we'll be able to see. If we paint with the brush tool, it's going to default to this brush, which is the charcoal feather brush. But we do have a lot of different types of brushes that are available. So you can see that they will all work in different manners and give us different types of effects. In addition to the brushes that are displayed here, we can go to the wing menu, and if we go to Brush Library, you'll see that we have a bunch of different types of brushes. So if I go to my artistic brushes, and if we go to the chalk charcoal pencil, it's going to actually open a separate brush panel with a bunch of different brushes. So if I select one of these types of brushes and I paint, you're going to see that we get different sorts of effects. Obviously, this is an endless array of different types of brushes. In addition to using the brushes that are displayed here, you can also make your own brushes. You'll probably need to spend a little bit of time and look over the brushes so that you can see which ones you'll want to use in your project. As soon as you preview any of these brushes, they will be added to your own brush palette, even if the brush strokes are deleted. If you want to control the width of any of the strokes, you'll select the brushes and open up your stroke palette. By default, the weight is 1, but we can reduce this down, and you can see as I reduce it down, the brush strokes get thinner. If we increase this value, the brush strokes are going to get thicker. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of the brush strokes that we just made. We'll go ahead and go back to the brush tool. We're going to change our fill color to white. I'm going to go back to my brush palette and we'll select this chalk scribble brush. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my group selection tool to select this gradient circle. And we're going to use this mode right here, which is going to draw inside. Now when I use the brush tool and I paint, it will only draw inside the particular brush. Now for some reason, my stroke got set back to black. So what we're going to do is we're going to simply change this to white once again. And now if I go ahead and draw, you'll see that I'm going to add my own custom sort of brush. So I'm going to just kind of swipe around this left-hand edge of the shape, and I don't have to be super careful because it will only paint inside. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to select the path that I just made, and we're going to open up the transparency palette. The transparency palette is located right here, or it's also bundled with the stroke and the gradient. We're going to change the opacity of this stroke to 50%. This will make the brush stroke not quite as apparent. Now I'll select my selection tool. I'm going to select the entire eye that we just made. I'll once again group everything together. And now I have the eyeball for my particular robot that we'll be building. We're going to ultimately want to make a copy of this, so we might as well just do that right now. In order to do that, I'm going to use my scale tool because the other eye is going to be slightly larger. So I'll click S, we'll hit return, and we're going to go ahead and scale this up by 115%. I'll click copy, and then we're going to use our move tool or selection tool and move this over to the right like so. If you need to make the eye any bigger, you can go ahead and grab the bounding box, and if you hold down the shift key, you'll constrain the scaling so that it proportionately scales. And then I'm going to select both of the eyes and scale them both down a little bit. Okay, that is looking really good so far. As you can see, we've used some of the techniques that we've talked about previously, and in addition, we've learned some new things that we can do within Illustrator.